Hey everybody, it is time once again for a 2021-2022 season preview, and today we're going to be looking at the Nashville Predators, who have made a couple of pretty significant trades this offseason and will be once again looking to be a playoff team this coming year, but in a pretty tough Central Division. I don't think it's any guarantee that they make the playoffs. I think they're going to be one of those teams that's really going to have to fight for all year long, just like they did last season, to sneak into that fourth spot. But it's going to be an interesting one here looking at Nashville. Before we start, I just ask you to please subscribe and hit that thumbs up. It helps out the channel a ton and is greatly appreciated. But let's get into it. And before we look ahead, we've got to look back to last season, where the Predators got off to a really bad start, but got a lot better as the season went along, and they ended up going 31-23-2 on the year. Good enough for 64 points and a fourth-place finish in the Central Division, which did get them into the playoffs. They lost in the first round against Carolina, but they were a playoff team last season, and they're going to be looking to get back there again this year. Now, they did not have a very good offense last year. They only scored 2.70 goals for per game. That is definitely an area of concern with this team. They have got to find a way to get more pucks in the net, or it's going to be hard for them to make the playoffs if they can't score goals. And last year, the offense was certainly lackluster, and it's something that they're going to need to improve this season if they're going to be able to be a top 4 team or top 3 team in that Central Division. So definitely an area that they're going to look to get better. Defensively, though, they were pretty good. They gave up just 2.75 goals against per game, which wasn't top of the league or anything like that, but was a very solid number. And, UC Saros in goal is going to be fully taking over now with Pecorine retired. And Saros is a guy that I've noticed over the past few years that kind of gets off to a slow start generally, but then gets lights out by about the midway point of the season, and is almost a Vezina-level player in the second half. So that's kind of been the trend with him. They're going to need him to play well all season long this year if they're going to be a playoff team. Special teams is a big problem. This is probably the biggest problem for this team. Their special teams on both sides are absolutely horrible. And this has been a trend with Nashville for the past few years, is not good special teams. First, it was kind of the power play that turned into garbage, and then the penalty kill has followed, and just 17.6% on the power play last season, which is absolutely abysmal, and their penalty kill was awful as well, just 75.6 on the penalty kill, near the bottom of the league in both categories. That's a big issue for them. They have got to get the special teams fixed, or it's going to cost them games, and costing them those games could end up costing them a playoff spot or not. So that is an area that has got to be better this year. Both sides, offensively and defensively, the special teams have got to be significantly better. But that was them last season. We'll see what they look like this coming year. They've made some changes this offseason, and as we look at the additions and subtractions here, obviously I think their biggest move was the Ryan Ellis trade. He is now in Philadelphia, and they ended up getting Phil Myers and Cody Glass out of that. That was a 3-team trade, so Myers comes in and replaces Ellis as far as a defenseman goes on the back end, and then Cody Glass coming in from Vegas is, well, he's a player that really didn't pan out, or hasn't panned out so far in the NHL as a Vegas Golden Knight. He could not solidify himself in that lineup, could not get a full-time spot in that Vegas lineup, and now a change of scenery might be good for him. He's a young player with a lot of upside, a lot of potential, but just hasn't really found his game at the NHL level. And, maybe with a new team and a new opportunity and a new situation, things could go better there. But Myers comes in, Glass comes in that trade. Ryan Ellis goes out. Also, Nolan Patrick ended up going to Vegas. So that was a 3-team deal that got a little complicated. But basically, they lose Ryan Ellis off of their D, and they get Phil Myers and Cody Glass. They also traded away Victor Arvidsson. He is now an LA King. And they got a couple of draft picks in return for him, but Arvidsson will not be there as a top 6 winger for them this season. Goaltender Pekka Rinne retired, so now it's Juuse Saros' net now. It is all on him to be the full-time starter in Nashville. Calle Jarnkrok was taken by Seattle in the expansion draft, so he is gone. Another, middle 6 winger gone for Nashville. And so they've lost a little bit of scoring there with Arvidsson and Jarnkrok, and they're going to need some young players to step up and fill those roles this year. Erik Haula left in free agency, Erik Goodbranson left in free agency, and Brad Richardson left in free agency as well. Haula going to the Bruins, Goodbranson and Richardson going to the Flames. So those are the subtractions. The additions, obviously Phil Myers and Cody Glass coming in, the big additions. David Rittich is your new backup goaltender. With Rinne retiring, Rittich was brought in to be Saros' backup. And then a couple of depth moves. Matt Tennyson signs a 2-way deal, depth defenseman, and Matt Luff signs a 2-way deal, depth forward. I think those guys are probably going to start out in the AHL and just be call-ups if there are injuries throughout the year. But we'll see. They could make the team, but those are definitely depth players. So moving on now to my projected roster for the Nashville Predators. This is who I think are going to make the team out of camp. And then look at the depth guys as well, there are some depth guys who I think could end up taking spots right out of the gate, and we'll talk about that when we get there. But for my forward group, my 13 forwards, I have Philip Forsberg, Matt Duchene, Ryan Johansson, Mikael Granlund, Luke Kunin, Colton Sissons, Rocco Grimaldi, Nick Cousins, Eli Tolvanen, Cody Glass, Tanner Janot, Matthew Olivier, and Yakov Trenin. I think Olivier and Trenin really bring that physicality on the 4th line that this team is going to want. They've kind of always played that way and had that grit in their bottom 6, so I think those guys fit it really well. However, there is going to be the opportunity for some other guys, some younger players that might be able to take a spot on this NHL roster that are in the depth category. On the defensive side of things, obviously Roman Josi, Phil Myers, Matthias Ekholm, and Dante Fabro are your top 4. I think that is absolutely guaranteed. You've got veteran Mark Borowiecki, Matt Benning. Those guys probably right now make up the bottom pair. And then I have Ben Harper as the 7th defenseman right now. However, I do think there's a strong chance that Harper or even Benning and Harper get their spots taken by some of these young defensemen that we'll talk about in the depth category. And then obviously in goal, Juuse Saros is your starting goaltender, and he, with Rinne gone, is in complete control. That is his net now, and David Rittich will be there as a backup. But I don't think we're going to see too much of Rittich. I think Saros is going to be playing a lot of games this season. Now we get to the depth category, and this is where things get interesting. Right now I have Philip Tomasino, Matt Luff, and a kind of almost unknown guy from Finland, Juuso Parssinen, as kind of the first guys in line to be called up to the NHL. And I think that Philip Tomasino could potentially take a roster spot right out of the gate. Right now I have Olivier and Trenin playing on that 4th line. We saw Tanner Janot last year. Obviously, think Tolvanen has completely solidified his spot. Cody Glass is kind of a question mark. I think he's going to have a good preseason and a good training camp to make it. Or you could see him potentially start the year down in the AHL, but they made the trade for him. I think that they were looking at that as kind of a move where they're going to give him a chance to be an NHL player, maybe more so than what Vegas did, and give him an opportunity to earn a job right away. And I think most likely he makes the team. But Tomasino is knocking on the door, and he certainly is going to be a guy that as soon as somebody goes down with an injury, I think will be the first call-up. Matt Luff, kind of more like a bottom 6 guy, 4th liner. If you need that role filled, Luff could definitely get a call-up, but I think he starts the year in the minors. And Parssinen is a really interesting guy. He hasn't played in North America yet. He's just coming over from Finland, but he put up some pretty darn good numbers in Finland. So I think he's going to be an interesting guy. Because he's never played in North America before, I think it's most likely that he plays a year in the AHL. He is 20 years old. I think he's going to have to adjust to North American hockey. But there's later in the year, he could absolutely be called up for this team. And he's definitely going to be an interesting guy to watch. I can't wait to see what he looks like in the preseason. On the defensive side of things, they have 3 defensemen that I think are pushing for NHL spots, all very successful college players. David Ference, Jeremy Davies, and Mark Del Gaizo. And Ference and Davies have already played NHL games. I think those guys are knocking on the door. If you're a depth defenseman on this team, if you're Ben Harper, if you're Matt Benning, if you're Mark Borowiecki even, these guys are coming and trying to take your job. And they are all very, very highly touted, successful college players. Very, really, really good defensemen in college. And it's going to be sooner rather than later that they are in the NHL. So there's definitely a possibility that Davies, Ference, and Del Gaizo push to earn jobs right away. And it's going to be interesting to see how that battle unfolds in the preseason to see who makes it and who ends up starting in the AHL. And then their third goaltender is Connor Ingram. If anything happens to Saros, I think this team is all done. But if anything were to happen to Saros or Riddick, and they were to miss time, Ingram, I believe, would be the call-up. But that is my projected roster out of the gate for the Predators. And there are definitely some roster spots up for grabs here because I think they have some young guys that are going to be pushing for playing time. Tomasino, particularly up front, and then Ference, Davies, and Del Gaizo, all on the back end, I think absolutely have a shot to play NHL games and probably will. So it's going to be interesting to see for sure how this all works out throughout the preseason and training camp for Nashville. But the Predators, to me, are going to be a really, really interesting team this year. They're going to be one of those right on the playoff lines. They're definitely not a bad team, but I don't think they're a guaranteed playoff team either, especially in that Central Division where, you kind of have a lot of teams in that same boat. Dallas is back in that boat. St. Louis, I think, is in that boat. Nashville's in that boat. Winnipeg, I think, is a playoff team. Colorado, obviously, should be a playoff team. So, you've got a good number of teams battling for a limited number of spots. Chicago, what are they going to be? If they're a playoff level team, that's another team in that group fighting for a limited number of playoff spots. Minnesota as well, I think, right in there. So, it's going to be a hard-fought division, and there are going to be some, pretty solid teams on the outside looking in, and there's a limited number of playoff spots, and I would say 5 or 6 teams going for them. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how the Central shakes out this year. But Nashville is definitely going to be a team that's going to be right in the thick of the playoff race. They're going to, I think, be right on that line of, finishing 3rd or 4th in the division or finishing 5th or 6th in the division. And there's not going to be much separating that group of teams. But it's definitely going to be fun to watch and interesting to see how it all works out. And that's pretty much what I got on the Preds this year. So with that, like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, the links to our memberships, merch store, and donation link are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you all soon.